Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I'd just walked through my front door when the mail slid through the slot, and I bent down to grab it without much thought. Bills, junk. Then, the thick envelope caught my eye. The elegant gold lettering on the front, the swirled calligraphy of my name. This wasn't something I expected. The invitation to Darren's wedding. I should have been happy for him. He was my brother. But instead, a cold knot twisted in my stomach. Luxury, I thought as I flipped it open. The word honor jumped out at me like it was mocking me. We would be honored to have you. Yeah, right. They couldn't even pretend to be casual about it. The last 15 years flashed in front of me, all those family dinners where they laughed at my paper-pushing job, Darren especially, the ringleader of all the jokes. "Clipboard queen," he called me, like I didn't deserve anything more than a desk and some paperwork. That's what I am to them, I thought. A joke. The invitation was heavy in my hand, and for a second, I wanted to just toss it in the trash. But I didn't. Maybe it was the weird, nagging feeling that I'd missed too much already. I hadn't seen my family in months. Hell, maybe years. The DEA had kept me too busy. Maybe this was the chance to show them I wasn't just the girl who organized files. Maybe this time, things would finally change. I stared at the invitation for a long time. I'd go. I owed it to myself. I parked in the lot of the beach resort, the bright sun bouncing off the pristine white buildings like it was showing off. Everything here was pristine, too perfect. I pulled my hair back into a tight ponytail, adjusting my simple dress to make sure I looked unremarkable. Nothing flashy. I didn't need them thinking I was trying too hard. As I stepped out of the car, I felt the weight of the sand under my boots, the salty breeze hitting my face like a slap. The resort looked like something out of a magazine. There was no way in hell Darren and Vanessa weren't throwing money at this place. I forced my legs to move toward the entrance, the noise of the wedding party spilling out from the front doors. Vanessa was the first to spot me. She glided over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her perfectly manicured hands coming up to greet me. "Elizabeth," she chirped, her voice sweet but thin. "So nice of you to come. Darren's been talking about you non-stop." I nodded, tight-lipped. Of course. Wouldn't miss it. She leaned in a little too close, lowering her voice just enough to make sure it wasn't overheard. "I just love how dedicated you are to your work. It's so reliable, you know. Not everyone gets to have a job with such stability." Her words were coated with the kind of sweetness that made my teeth itch. She wasn't congratulating me. She was making a point. But I didn't let it show. I just gave a quick smile and said, "Yeah, stability's nice." Before she could throw in another jab, Darren appeared, strolling up with his usual swagger, his group of finance buddies trailing behind him like they were about to close some deal. They all wore matching smirks, and I could already feel the tension tightening in my chest. Darren slapped me on the back, too hard, like we were old pals, even though we hadn't spoken much in the last year. "Look who's here, the queen of the civil service." His laugh was loud and exaggerated, like he was proud of the joke, like it was the funniest thing he'd ever said. His friends chuckled awkwardly, glancing between me and him. I could feel the eyes on me, but I kept my face blank. "Yep," I said, offering the kind of smile that only people who are used to being laughed at can give. Just living the dream. Another laugh from Darren's group. He loved this, turning me into some kind of cautionary tale. The one who chose the safe, boring path when he and his friends had real jobs. Jobs that required expensive suits and important-sounding titles. They all moved off to grab drinks, and I found myself standing there, feeling like the odd one out again, the outsider in the place I should have belonged. As I scanned the crowd, I caught Darren talking to one of his friends, a guy in a sharp suit who kept glancing over at me like I was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. He'd probably heard the clipboard queen jokes too, and now he was looking at me with the same curiosity they all had. I'd been the family joke for so long. It was like I was the backdrop to their perfect lives. A part of me, just a tiny part, wondered if anyone there would ever see beyond the narrative Darren had painted for me. But it didn't matter. I knew better than to hope. So I swallowed it, and I stayed quiet. Just another day of playing the role they'd cast me in. Dinner was an exercise in restraint. I was seated at the miscellaneous relatives table, which, from what I could tell, was the one where you put all the people you don't really want to talk to. The air around me hummed with the sound of clinking silverware and forced conversation. But the truth was, nobody here actually wanted to talk to me. They were just too polite to ignore me outright. Aunt Denise, sitting across from me with her too loud laugh and a drink that looked suspiciously like it was poured a little too early in the evening, didn't waste any time. "So, Elizabeth, how's that job of yours going?" Still organizing all those folders for the state. She said it like it was an old inside joke that I should have been in on, but I knew better. It was the same tired question I'd been hearing for years. I barely got a chance to answer before Darren's voice boomed from the other end of the table. "Oh, come on, Aunt Denise. Don't sell her short. Elizabeth's job is way more important than that. She's practically irreplaceable. They're lucky to have someone as valuable as her. Way too valuable to fire." A few people chuckled, a few more sipped their drinks. I stared down at my plate, poking at the steak in front of me, cutting it into small, methodical pieces like I could control the moment. If I focused on the rhythm of cutting the meat, I could avoid the discomfort. But it wasn't working. Aunt Denise laughed, clearly pleased with herself. "Well, I think it's wonderful she's got something so stable to fall back on. Not everyone can be a high flyer like you, Darren." And that was it. The hook. Vanessa, who'd been sitting quiet next to Darren up until that point, decided to chime in. "Oh, totally," she said, her voice so syrupy sweet I could feel the fake enthusiasm sticking to my skin. "Not everyone can be a high achiever like Darren and all his friends. Some people just have to stick to, what's it called? The office life." She paused for a beat, looking over at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But I guess that's okay, right? Not everyone's cut out for big dreams." I felt a twinge in my chest, like something sharp had jabbed into me, but it wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Instead of letting it show, I smiled and cut another piece of steak. "Yeah," I said, slow and deliberate. "Big dreams are overrated. Who needs them when you've got stability, right?" I said it with just enough sarcasm to make sure the point landed without coming off as too obvious. Vanessa laughed. The others at the table hesitated for a second, unsure if they should follow her lead, and then they did. It was like they were all following some unspoken rule that they could laugh at me as long as I stayed in my place. I didn't care, or at least, I pretended not to. The conversation drifted into other topics, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Darren was getting some kind of sick satisfaction from using me as the punchline of every joke. It was like he had to make sure everyone knew the real Elizabeth, the one who couldn't get anything right, the one who was stuck at some dead-end job, while he was building his dream life with Vanessa and the rest of his finance buddies. I cut my steak into another precise slice, chewing it slowly. I could feel their eyes on me, even though they were pretending to talk about the weather now. It didn't matter. I knew how to sit in the silence and make them uncomfortable, just like they'd been making me uncomfortable for years. For a moment, I wondered how long I could keep up the charade, how long I could keep pretending that their narrow view of me didn't get under my skin. But that's the thing about families, they never change. So I just kept cutting, kept nodding, kept playing the part they wanted me to play. Maybe, just maybe, I was getting good at it. The speech started, and I could feel it before Vanessa even opened her mouth. There was a thin, almost invisible thread of tension in the air, like everyone knew this moment was important, but not in a way that felt real, not in a way that felt genuine. They all turned their attention toward her, this picture-perfect woman in her ivory gown, smiling like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Vanessa cleared her throat, and the crowd hushed, the clinking of silverware dying down. She stepped up to the microphone with that little tilt of her head, the kind that made her look like she was holding back something she knew everyone wanted to hear. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "It's such an honor to be here today, to stand beside the love of my life. Darren has worked so hard to get to where he is, and watching him succeed has been nothing short of inspiring." There it was, the familiar note of "we've made it." I could almost hear the smugness in her voice, the pride in the life they'd built, money, status, a future paved with expensive vacations and private clubs, the stuff that meant success, at least in their world. She paused, glanced over at Darren, who was watching her like he couldn't believe his luck, and then continued. "And I know that not everyone can aim as high as we have. Some people are just meant for simpler lives, and that's okay." The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't even look up from my plate, still poking at the salad in front of me, but I could feel the eyes that darted toward me, the uncomfortable chuckles and sideways glances. I wasn't just an afterthought in her speech, I was the punchline. I stayed silent, focused on my food, but the uncomfortable weight of the room's attention felt heavier now. Most of them probably had no idea she was even talking about me, but I knew. She wasn't just talking about some people. She was talking about me, about how I'd never been good enough to live up to their dream life. The crowd responded with a few half-hearted claps, a couple of hears, and that was it. The speech was over, and I could feel the air shift as the attention spread back across the room, moving away from Vanessa and Darren to whoever else was worth talking to. But there was one person who lingered: Brandon. Brandon was one of Darren's college buddies, the one who'd always given me that weird, unblinking stare when we'd all gathered for family events. He didn't have the easy confidence of the others, but he was too polite to say anything that made him seem like he didn't belong. I'd noticed him looking at me more than once during dinner, eyes lingering for a second too long, like he was trying to figure me out. He walked toward me as the crowd started shifting, holding up his phone in one hand, like he was about to ask me for a picture. But instead of a selfie, he said, "Hey, are you the DEA agent from that big bus last year? The one who brought down that trafficking ring?" The words hit me like a shot, the suddenness of it making me stiffen in my seat. I hadn't been expecting this. Not here, not now. His voice was louder than it should have been, and some people nearby turned, their curiosity piqued by his question. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for an answer. My heart started to race, but I kept my expression calm, like I was used to this sort of thing. I nodded slowly, giving him a tight smile. "Yeah, that's me." My voice was steady, even though the blood rushed in my ears. "You're probably thinking of the bust in Miami last summer. It was a big one." He glanced down at his phone, swiping through it with quick, practiced motions. "I thought it was you." "That was huge," he said, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "I remember reading about it, but I didn't realize you were, well, her." He tilted his head like it all made sense now, like he had figured something out. A murmur started at the table across the room, some low chatter, some heads turning. Darren's friends were starting to notice the conversation. Their smiles faded, and the easy atmosphere of the evening shifted. I didn't look at them. I couldn't. I just stayed still, letting Brandon's words settle in the air. They weren't mine anymore. "Yeah, well, it's been a while since then," I said, my voice measured. "But I'm not really here to talk about that." Brandon's eyes flicked back to me, a mix of surprise and something else, curiosity, maybe even a little awe. I was starting to feel like the joke had backfired, and I couldn't decide if I liked the shift in the room or hated it. But the quiet buzz of the crowd told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't been expecting this, and neither had I. Brandon stood there for a moment, staring at his phone, scrolling through it like he was reading a script. He had that excited look on his face, like he'd just found the missing piece of a puzzle. And then, without even thinking, he blurted it out. "Oh, wow, here it is," he said loudly, lifting the phone for the people around us to see. "Elizabeth Reynolds," he read aloud, "DEA agent, instrumental in the takedown of the Rodriguez drug cartel." He glanced up at me, a grin spreading across his face. "This is you, right? You're the one who busted a major trafficking ring in Miami last year. You're not just some office worker. You're the agent behind that bust, the one in all the headlines." The noise in the room stopped. For a second, it felt like everything froze. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hum of the band in the corner. People turned their heads slowly, like they'd just heard something they weren't supposed to. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their stares like an electric current. I felt my pulse quicken, but I didn't flinch. I kept my gaze steady on Brandon. He was still smiling, oblivious to the ripples he'd just caused. But the room was changing. People were leaning in, whispering, eyes flicking between me and the phone in his hand. Darren stepped forward, trying to laugh it off, trying to regain control of the situation. "Oh, come on, Brandon," he said with that familiar, easy charm. "You've got it all wrong. Elizabeth doesn't do all that. She just files paperwork for some narcotics thing, right? It's not like she was really involved. Come on." But his words landed flat, hollow. The crowd didn't laugh. They just stared, waiting for something more, something real. Brandon didn't let it go. He held up his phone, scrolling a bit faster now, pulling up more articles. No, I'm serious. This is her. I mean, look, here's the press release. The Department of Justice named her in the official statement. And here's the news footage from the Miami bust. She was right there on the front lines, taking down one of the biggest cartels in the country. The air grew heavier, the silence more profound. People were starting to realize the truth. They weren't just staring at the woman who had been the punchline of their jokes all evening. They were staring at someone completely different, someone they hadn't expected. Darren opened his mouth, probably to make another joke, but the words didn't come. He swallowed hard and looked around the room, suddenly uncomfortable. His friends shifted uneasily in their seats, trying to figure out what to do with the new version of me standing in front of them. I took a breath and finally stood up, my chair scraping against the floor in the quiet. I didn't make a big show of it. I didn't need to. "Yeah, that's me," I said, my voice calm, flat. "I was part of the bust. I'm a DEA agent, not just a paper pusher." I let the words hang there for a second, letting the gravity of it settle. I didn't need to say anything more. I wasn't here for their approval, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let them twist my story into something it wasn't. "Don't get me wrong," I added, glancing at Darren, then back at the room. "I've done a lot of filing, a lot of paperwork. It's part of the job, but there's a hell of a lot more to it than what you've been told." I looked at Vanessa, who hadn't said a word since Brandon dropped the bomb. "And I've put in the hours. Been in deep cover, high-risk cases, multiple commendations." I felt the heat of their gazes on me, but I stayed steady. I didn't care if they understood or not. "Don't believe everything you hear," I said, my eyes scanning the table. "Not everyone's life is as simple as you think." The room was still. The silence stretched out like a thick fog, and the crowd slowly began to shift, murmuring among themselves. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about them, and the truth they couldn't hide from anymore. The image they had built in their minds of who I was, it had cracked. And I didn't need to do anything but stand there for them to see it. Darren's face was flushed now, his usual confidence evaporating under the weight of the moment. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Brandon lowered his phone, staring at me for a moment longer before backing off, not sure what to say anymore. I didn't stick around for their reaction. There was nothing left to prove. The room was still, the air thick with the aftermath of the bomb Brandon had dropped. Vanessa, who had once been so full of fake smiles and carefully chosen words, now looked pale, almost sick. Her perfect posture had slumped, and she slowly sank back into her chair, her hands gripping the sides of the table like she was trying to keep herself from floating away. Aunt Denise didn't even blink. She just stared at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. Her mouth was open, and I could practically hear the wheels in her head turning. She didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know what to make of it either, but it was happening, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. Darren, on the other hand, tried to regain control, his face flushed with that fake confidence he always used when he was trying to laugh his way out of a situation. He cleared his throat, giving me a quick, tight smile. All right, let's not make a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be, okay? Elizabeth's just..." He waved his hand around like he was brushing the whole thing away. "It's a paperwork thing. Nothing crazy. It's not like she's the hero or anything." The table was quieter now, but I could feel the shift. The guests who had been laughing with him before, who had made me the punchline, now stared at him like he was the one who had made the mistake. A few exchanged glances. Some of them looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Respect maybe, or at least curiosity. Whatever it was, it didn't sit right with Darren, and he didn't like it. I exhaled, leaning back slightly, and I felt the eyes of the room on me. Some waiting for me to say something, some just waiting for the next thing to happen. "I never corrected the story, Darren," I said, my voice steady, calm. "Not because I couldn't, but because it was easier for me to stay invisible, to let you all think what you wanted to think. You wanted me to be the joke, the boring one with the safe job, and that worked for me. That kept me off your radar, kept me safe." The words hung in the air like a weight, and I felt a small sense of release. I wasn't explaining myself for their comfort anymore. I was telling the truth. "Deep cover," I continued. "High-risk cases. You don't get into that line of work and broadcast it to your family. If I told you, it would have put both me and my career at risk. The less you knew, the better." I paused, looking down at my hands for a moment, collecting my thoughts. The discomfort in the room wasn't fading. It was settling in, like a rock lodged in the pit of everyone's stomachs. Uncle Mike, who'd been quiet up until then, shifted in his seat, trying to break the tension with one of his jokes. He was the kind of guy who always tried to lighten things up, to make everything feel okay, even when it wasn't. "Well, hey," he said with a forced chuckle. At least you're not in jail, huh? But the joke didn't land. It felt like a bad fit, like he was trying to force a laugh that nobody could give him. The table stayed silent, everyone waiting for something to shift. But it was too late for that. The vibe had changed completely. No one was joking now. No one was comfortable. I didn't need to keep talking. They'd heard enough. But I could feel it. The way everyone's eyes shifted between me and Darren. The way they couldn't decide who was the fool anymore. The crowd was seeing what I already knew. It was never about who I was. It was always about the story they'd made up to make themselves feel better. And now that story had cracked. They didn't know how to fit me into their narrative. The silence stretched, and I felt that familiar knot in my chest loosen just a little. Maybe this was the moment they'd stop looking down on me. Maybe it wasn't about their approval anymore. I wasn't here to be a part of their world. I finished my drink in one long sip, set the glass down, and stood up. I didn't need to make a scene. The truth had already done that for me. I made my way toward the door, the weight of the evening finally starting to settle in my shoulders. It wasn't the quiet relief I'd expected, though. It felt more like exhaustion, a slow burn that had been smoldering all night. I turned to Vanessa, who was still sitting at the table, staring at her glass like she was trying to will herself to disappear. "Congratulations, Vanessa," I said, keeping my tone polite. "The wedding was beautiful." I didn't mean it, but I wasn't here to argue. She didn't respond, just gave me a thin, tight smile, barely looking up as I grabbed my bag and slung it over my shoulder. I headed toward the exit, the sound of my footsteps echoing too loudly in the space that had grown eerily quiet. Just as I pushed the door open, I heard Darren's voice calling after me. "Elizabeth, wait." I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. But he was quick. He caught up to me just as I stepped outside into the cool night air, the scent of the ocean in the distance. The lights from the resort flickered behind me, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. "Come on, just wait," he said, his voice tight, urgent. "Can we talk? Please." I stood there for a moment, breathing in the night air, letting the coolness wash over me. Then I turned to face him, eyes meeting his with a calm I didn't feel. "You want to talk?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. "About what?" He ran a hand through his hair, his face contorting into something like regret. "Look, I didn't mean for it to go down like that. You know it was just jokes, right? Just a little teasing. It's not like I wanted to hurt you." I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at him, letting the silence stretch between us. He fidgeted, looking more and more uncomfortable by the second. "It wasn't just jokes, Darren," I said finally, my voice low. "You've been doing this for years. Making me the joke, telling everyone I was the one who couldn't keep up, couldn't play in your world. It wasn't just teasing, it was your way of defining me, of making sure I stayed small so you could feel bigger. That wasn't a joke. It was your identity for me. And I let it happen because it was easier to stay invisible than to face what it would mean to tell you the truth." He opened his mouth, like he was about to argue, but nothing came out. His face was flushed now, his eyes wide with a mixture of frustration and realization. "Well, I didn't ask for this, Darren," I added, my voice a little sharper now. "I didn't ask to be your warning label. You could have asked me what I really did. You could have known the truth, but you didn't. You didn't want to know. It wasn't about me, it was about you and what you needed to believe about your life." I turned away from him then, not giving him another second to try and fix it. "I'm leaving, Darren. You should stay here with your perfect little life and your perfect little jokes," I said, my back already to him, my hand on the handle of my car. The engine roared to life as I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the lights of the resort fading in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had nothing left to prove. And for once, I didn't feel the weight of their expectations on me anymore. I hadn't gotten far, just down the street, past the row of palm trees lining the resort's entrance. The road was quiet, the only sound the hum of my car engine and the soft thump of my heartbeat in my ears. Then, suddenly, the headlights of a car cut through the dark, pulling up next to mine. I glanced to the side, already knowing who it was. Darren's car slid to a stop beside me, his face visible in the rearview mirror, tight with frustration. He wasn't laughing now. He wasn't pretending anymore. He was serious. He got out of the car and walked toward me, quick steps that told me this wasn't going to be another round of jokes. No, this time, he was trying to make sense of it, trying to salvage whatever it was he thought we still had. I rolled down my window as he approached, not bothering to hide the fatigue in my voice. What now? He stopped in front of me, hands on his hips, his jaw set. Why'd you let us all believe it for 15 years? He sounded almost desperate, like the walls around his perfect little world were crumbling, and he didn't know how to hold it up. Why didn't you just tell us? Why didn't you correct us? I leaned back in the seat, my eyes trained straight ahead. It felt like I'd been waiting for this question my whole life, and now that it was here, I didn't have to think twice about the answer. Because your story gave you power, Darren. Your version of me, of my life, made you the star of your own little show. It made you feel bigger, smarter, better, and I let you have it. It was easier for me to be invisible, to let you all believe what you wanted, what you needed. He opened his mouth like he was going to argue, but I didn't let him. Don't you get it? I snapped, turning my head to finally look him in the eye. I didn't need your validation. I didn't need your approval or your version of who I was. But you, Darren, you needed me to be the boring one. You needed me to be the punchline so that you could keep being the guy with all the success and the shiny future. I took a breath, keeping my tone calm, my voice steady. I wasn't going to let him twist this into something he could walk away from. You never asked me what I actually did, I continued, my eyes holding his. You didn't care to know. You didn't care enough to even ask. All you cared about was the story that fit into your perfect little world. It made things easier for you and for me. It was safer. I paused, letting the weight of the silence sit between us. But now, it's out there. The truth, and that's on you. Darren shifted on his feet, his face changing from frustration to something else. Regret, maybe. I didn't mean for it to be like this, he said, his voice quieter now, trying to backpedal. I'm sorry, okay. I didn't mean to hurt you. His apology hung in the air for a second, but I didn't take it. I couldn't, because this wasn't about an apology. It wasn't about him being sorry. This isn't a misunderstanding, Darren, I said, my voice steady but sharp. This is the consequence of your actions. You spent 15 years using me, using my job, my life, to prop up your own. And now it's coming back to you. I shook my head slightly, letting the reality of it settle. You don't get to undo that just because you feel bad now. He looked at me like he was trying to figure out how to fix it, how to put the pieces of the night back together. But he couldn't. Not this time. He'd broken it, and now he had to deal with the aftermath. Just like everyone else in the room did, just like I had to. I don't want your apology, Darren, I said, my tone final. I don't need it. There was a long pause. He stood there staring at me, his hands shoved into his pockets, like he was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. I didn't feel sorry for him. I couldn't. Finally, I looked at him one last time. This is on you, and you're gonna have to live with it. I put the car in drive and slowly pulled away, not looking back. I didn't need to. The truth was out, and for once, it was enough. I woke up to the blaring of my phone, the screen lighting up with a flood of missed calls and texts. My head was foggy from the lack of sleep, my body heavy with the aftermath of the night. I rubbed my eyes, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The numbers on the screen blurred for a second before I realized what it was. 20-something missed calls. The text notifications were endless, each one piling on top of the next. Most of them were from numbers I didn't recognize, random wedding guests or family members who probably felt like they had to say something. But then I saw it. My mom's name at the top of the list. We need to talk, it read, the words blunt and loaded. I sighed, pressing my fingers to my temples as the phone buzzed again. My mom's message wasn't a surprise. I'd been expecting something like it, maybe even bracing myself. She'd always been the one who could calm the storm in our family, but now, she wasn't even sure what to say. I scrolled through the messages. Most of them were variations of the same thing. Apologies, confusion, the occasional attempt at humor, as if what happened last night was just some big misunderstanding. But it wasn't. They all knew it. They were just too proud to admit it. As I sat there, phone in hand, I couldn't help but reflect on how little I needed to say to flip their entire narrative. Just a few simple words, a few quiet truths, and the walls they'd built around me had come crumbling down. It was a strange kind of power, not one I'd ever sought, but one that felt right, even if it left a hollow pit in my stomach. Darren and Vanessa's wedding reception, their big night, was going to be remembered for all the wrong reasons now. It wasn't the way they'd imagined it. not the perfect celebration they'd planned. The spotlight had shifted from their glossy, flawless life to the uncomfortable truth they'd spent years pretending didn't exist. I leaned back against the headboard, staring out the window at the hazy morning light filtering in. For a moment, I let myself feel a little satisfaction, but not in the way they probably thought. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't about getting back at them. It was relief. For once, I didn't have to prove anything. The truth did that for me. No jokes, no playing along with their version of who I was. I didn't have to keep hiding, pretending to be the person they needed me to be so they could feel comfortable. I wasn't invisible anymore, and maybe, for the first time, I felt like that was enough.